All right, Jesse, are you ready for rapid fire?
Is it that time already?
It is. It is. And there's a couple things I think that I've still kind of got queued up that I might work into rapid fire here. But
Uh-oh.
ESPN is predicting a tight end to be Notre Dame's breakout player this season. Is it more critical to their success to have a breakout tight end, wide receiver, or running back this year?
I would have to say it is more crucial for their success that a wide receiver be the breakout player on the offense. And I have to say that ESPN picking tight end was a sleepy and lazy answer.
I
Anyone could
know.
just slap on tight end on Notre Dame and say, that's the breakout player because what gets drafted at Notre Dame?
Tight
Tight
ends.
ends. So
They have a
they didn't.
breakout tight end like every other year on
Right.
average,
So they spent like 30 seconds on this question and they're like, oh yeah, tight end. That's the easy one. But they definitely need a wide receiver. We talked about this. Denbrock had 2,000-yard receivers at LSU last season. Notre Dame hasn't had a 1,000-yard receiver in I don't know how many years.
Chase Claypool, 2019. That was the last one.
If Notre Dame wants to have success and be serious in the big games, Texas A&M, Florida State, USC playoffs, however far they get in the playoffs, they need a stud wide receiver. They need someone that, hey, on a 3rd and 3, we know our guy is going to win a quick slant, and we're just going to put the ball on him and pick up the first down. You know what I mean? Just a guy is going to do that. Like to me, the honest comparison is like when the Cowboys got rolling this last season, everyone knew CeeDee Lamb was going to catch the ball, but they couldn't stop him. That's what Notre Dame needs. It's just a guy that is going to get the ball. That's their playmaker, but you really can't do anything about it.
That's what Michael Mayer was a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But Michael Mayer doesn't have the breakaway speed of a wide receiver. So there's a big difference if it's a tight end versus a wide receiver. And that's why it needs to be a wide receiver, because you're going to get more explosive plays if that go-to guy is a wide receiver as opposed to a tight end. As great as tight end and as great a pass catcher as Michael Mayer was, you can still only be so downfield when a tight end is the consistent go-to guy. And that's why it needs to be a wide receiver, because even in the running backs room, like a couple of those guys are going to step up and they're going to be great. And you're probably going to have a couple of running backs, just like 2 years ago when it was Estime and Diggs. You're going to have a couple of guys pushing for around 1,000 yards. But, like the way that Dylan McCullough has broken that up, he's got all these different jobs that he divvies up. And so you're going to see, a handful of guys who are going to be getting it, but they need to be more vertical. Marcus Freeman knows that. Mike Denbrock knows that. That's why they went out and brought in guys like Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins. And so it absolutely has to be a wide receiver that needs to be the breakout guy. The closest thing they've had to 1,000 yards since that Claypool season was Kevin Austin, 888 yards in 2021. So they need a receiver to start hauling the groceries a little bit more consistently. Fill in the blank. It is blank that ESPN has picked Notre Dame as one of the 10 teams they believe can win the women's basketball national championship.
To me, it's not surprising that ESPN has picked Notre Dame as one of the 10 teams that they think can win the women's national championship. Had you told me this a month ago, I would say that they were crazy. But the women's team ended on a stretch that no one else in the country can really say. I mean, they beat Louisville, ranked team. They beat Virginia Tech, winner of the ACC regular season championship, with a healthy Kitley. They go on to beat Louisville, Virginia Tech, and North Carolina State in the ACC tournament. That's 5 straight ranked wins. I've talked about it before. The Notre Dame women's team is good at home. They're good on the road. They're good at neutral places. And realistically, they have one of the top scorers in the country in Hannah Hidalgo. And the thing that separates them the most is they're playing elite defense down the stretch. And so you combine a player that can lead the nation in scoring, be a top 5 player in the nation in scoring, lead the nation in steals, and then a really good defense on the back end, it's going to be hard to beat a team like Notre Dame. And then you throw in, the experience that they had outside of the ACC. They've played really good teams outside of conference play, and they've won some of those games. So when you're looking at a resume of someone who's been quote unquote battle tested during the regular season, Notre Dame is very well battle tested. They just kind of had to work out some synchronization issues of injuries and, who the team was going to run through and etc. But they're playing really great defense right now. And I think that's going to get them a long way in the tournament.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, we talked about it this week. They've held opponents to a little over 56 points a game during the 8-game winning streak that they're on right now. And they're not just doing it against anybody. The last 5 teams they've played have been ranked, and they've all been repeat opponents, so you've got scouting reports on each other and everything else, and they're still holding them to that. And, it just shows how far they've come over the course of the season and really how good they can be. And, again, like you talk about, we know what they can be offensively, but defense has been the difference. And as ESPN pointed out in this little paragraph that they wrote, that those teams that they played in this streak have all been different, distinctively different kinds of teams as well. So they've played great against, different styles of offense and still been able to score against different styles of defense as well. Is depth an issue? Sure. But, that's mainly if they get into foul trouble and that kind of stuff. And as we've talked about, they've won national championships before using just 6 players in the rotation. So, they can do it.
That those, sorry not to cut you off, but those ACC refs from the tournament should not be invited to the NCAA tournament. So many whistles and fouls.
Man. And it was like, it's just crazy how, like how differently they can start calling a game from one half to the next, because things were, they 1 minute they're letting them play, and then maybe they're like, oh, we've let this thing get too far out of control, and now they're calling a bunch of stupid stuff. You're exactly right, but that's an issue, I think, at all levels, unfortunately. But I think really the fact that they've showed themselves to be more than capable as a zone defensive team as well, I think, especially against some of these more athletic teams like an NC State the other day, when they can go to zone, obviously you can start getting hurt if the other team gets hot from beyond the arc. But Notre Dame is also they were the best 3-point defensive team in the ACC, 26th in the nation in 3-point defense. The 4th best Power 5 team in the nation in 3-point defense. So the tournament's all about matchups, and they get the right matchups. I think that they can. I think that they can do it. I really do.
I think the main thing for them is, I hope that they can get a 3 seed and avoid a potential 1 versus 4 in the Sweet 16. I think that's what's going to go a long way for them.
Yeah. And I think they will. I know a lot of people are talking about a number 2. I think 3 is really realistic. And it's going to be really interesting to see what the committee thinks of them when everything comes. That road win, like you mentioned, they've been like, the fact that they have road wins at UConn and at Tennessee this year, I think can potentially go a long way. And even like, winning at Duke and at Florida State, those kind of things I think can go a long way. So I think that they've got a really good shot at being the number 3. And I think, just like you said, I think that that's going to be vital, avoiding that number 1 and, having a 2-3 matchup potentially instead. Well, the men's team saw their season potentially come to an end today with their loss to Wake Forest in the ACC tournament. They won a game in the first round of the ACC tournament yesterday. They lost 72-59 to Wake Forest, a team they beat a couple of weeks ago at home. How do you feel about this season now that it is potentially over with a 13-20 record in Micah Shrewsbury's first year?
Honestly, I feel like this season was a success. They got to the ACC tournament. They won a game in the ACC tournament, and then they got to a 5-12 matchup today. And on paper, you would say that they should probably lose that game. Did I still think that they had a shot of beating Wake Forest today? Sure, but I didn't think that they realistically should beat Wake Forest, and I didn't realistically think that they'd have an above 500 record in the conference, an overall record. etc. And then when you start looking in terms of like master plan, I would say that Notre Dame is ahead of schedule because I really didn't expect like a potential winning season until year 3. And I think that's a usual year for any sport. 1 year you're kind of, because I mean you can't take Marcus Freeman as the example, because a lot of programs when you enter as a head coach, it's for reasons of the team was probably bad and they had to get rid of a coach, and so your job is to come in and make things better. And that's kind of unfortunately what happened with the men's team and Mike Bray is, Shrewsbury had a lot to clean up. So I didn't realistically think this thing would just get turned around in year 1 or year 2, really. But I think that there is a good expectation or good chance that they could be an above 500 team next year and potentially a bubble team on getting into the NCAA tournament. So I feel really good about them being ahead of schedule. And I feel really good about them establishing, kind of their foundational, how we're going to play, in terms of defense, effort, etc. And now we can kind of start improving, the scoring and the shooting and those sort of things. So I think they're ahead of schedule, and I feel great about it because I think we're going to see, a new era of basketball at Notre Dame. I think you're going to see a type of offense and scoring that we haven't seen at Notre Dame in a while. It's just going to take a little bit of time.
You saw the kind of positive signs that you wanted to see from this team. Somebody said yesterday, I think, that the team at the end of the season that Notre Dame had would have beaten the team at the beginning of the season by 50 points or something to that effect. And I think that that's probably right. They made the kind of incremental, like there were stretches during in January during that losing streak, it's like, man, can this team score at all? And, then it started coming around. And you look at the fact that Marcus Burton ends up being the ACC Rookie of the Year. And a lot of people were down on, young Shrewsbury for shooting too much, early in the season. And by the time it was all said and done, he was a much more consistent shooter. These were all not all, but they were by and large, it was just a very young and inexperienced team. And they figured a lot of things out. And as you said, Micah Shrewsbury laid the foundation for what he wants this program to be, built on defense, built on effort. And, he called the team out for lack of effort a couple of different times. And since that point, that's really when we've started to see this upswing and an improvement of play. Really since that happened, I think it was like late January when he called him out. So, 13-20 on the surface, it doesn't look great, but when you kind of go micro and you look at how things improved over the course of the season and how much more they won at the end of the season, I think that there's nothing but positive expectations for this program going forward. You get a couple more scores, continue to get a little bit more size in there. I think that they can be really good here within the next couple of years. And like you said, knocking on the door, maybe a bubble team for the tournament next year, if not even, on top of the bubble a year from now. DK says he's pissed because coach was talking natty before the season. I think DK has been talking to Vince about that. Remember Vince getting all upset talking about national championships during his introductory press conference. Fill in the blank. There's talk that the Chicago Bears could keep Justin Fields and draft Caleb Williams at number 1. It would be blank if that happens.
It would be outrageous if that happens because you are inviting so much controversy, right? It's funny. Like if you think about this in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's the worst idea because I don't like drafting a young quarterback and throwing them to the fire immediately. Like look at what the Packers did with Jordan Love. Everyone just wrote Jordan Love off because he sat behind Rodgers for 2 or 3 seasons and they allowed him to develop and learn. I think that's what Caleb Williams needs, but with how much, all this talk around Fields and the number 1 pick, like if they did that, you couldn't reasonably explain that to fans. Like we're going to hold on to Justin Fields while allowing Caleb Williams to develop in the background. Like I think it's the logical thing to do, but it makes sense. It makes more sense when you have an actual like an Aaron Rodgers at quarterback,
Well,
or
that's
a Dak
the thing.
Prescott at quarterback, or Jared Goff at quarterback, whoever it might be.
Because that's the first thing I thought of as well when I thought of this was, it's like, on the one hand, it doesn't seem like this would be a really good situation. But then on the other hand, you did have the Packers, and the Packers drafted Jordan Love, and he sat for a couple of years behind Aaron Rodgers. But the biggest difference is there's like 15 years of age between Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love. One was, Rodgers was going to have to leave at some point, and so they went out and they got Love late in the first round, and they made that trade to do it. Whereas in the situation with Fields and Williams, there's like 2 years of age difference between them. So it's a lot different when you're talking about two young quarterbacks who are presumably, one is supposed to be hitting his prime here pretty soon, and another one just coming in the league. So I don't think that would be the optimal situation. And, there's all this talk that there's no market for Fields, and, it's probably accurate, but I think what's probably even more accurate is there's no market for Fields because nobody wants to pay, the draft, like a second or round or, better, whatever package of draft picks to get a guy like Justin Fields. I mean, the bottom line is the guy is 10-28 as a starter. And you can blame the system. You can blame the talent around him, even though they went out and got DJ Moore last year. They had better talent around him. The guy was a first-round pick 3 years ago. The same draft, and you brought up Jordan Love, the same draft as Jordan Love. And Love looked better as a first-year starter after sitting 2 years last year than the guy with more experience, Justin Fields, did, regardless of who your offensive coordinator is. So I can't see the Bears keeping both guys. My guess is this could walk like right up until draft night, and somewhere in the middle of draft night where either Fields gets traded or the pick gets traded, whatever it happens to be. If they finally, like, it's in the Bears' interest to play it obviously as close to the vest as possible. Keep everything, hold on to all your options, because all it does is turn into a better bargaining chip for you, I think, down the road. So that's what I think is going to happen. Either the pick gets moved or Fields gets moved at some point. And, again, it might take right up until draft night before it all happens.
Yeah, and honestly, with the Bears contemplating this, it just shows to me that they want to draft Caleb Williams, but they can't pawn Justin Fields off for nearly enough that they can get. And so they're almost like, how can we build back up Justin Fields' interest? What can we do in order to get, something in return or exchange for Justin Fields? So it's really felt like, they haven't done anything to help themselves out. They've allowed Justin Fields to become the scrutiny or the scapegoat. Now they want to trade said scapegoat and get something out of him. Well, it's like, well, you're also the same organization that is contemplating whether or not he's even, an NFL quarterback. So what would make other teams interested in picking up someone like himself, right? So, like, you're not doing anything to help.
How are you giving him any value? Yeah,
right.
That's right.
And so the more you hold on to him, again, I think it's like we're not getting enough value out of him. So what can we do to potentially build his value back up?
Right. I can't see any way that they're both on the same roster next year. But in the meantime, you've got a lot of other moves being made. One of them being Sam Darnold going to Minnesota. Do you buy or sell him as the answer at quarterback in the post-Kirk Cousins era with the Vikings?
I do not buy him as the next quarterback in Minnesota. And I'm really interested to see, what Minnesota's overall plan is here, because they clearly didn't want to pay Kirk Cousins. I think Kevin McConnell is the head coach, or O'Donnell. I think he's a little bit, I think he pumps his ego up a little bit. I think he thinks he can win with just about like any quarterback, right? Like, I think he's like, oh, he's trying to basically do what San Francisco has done in Minnesota, being like, I don't need a top end quarterback being an offensive guy in order to win. And so I don't know what the answer is at Minnesota. I think they're going to like piece something together and then, just get a bunch of guys like Sam Darnold, make it a quarterback competition and basically say whoever wins type situation. But to me, a more interesting concept would be like if the Vikings draft a quarterback this season and like say someone like Jaden Daniels fell to Minnesota with like Justin Jefferson and, Jordan Addison at wide receiver. Like I think that they could potentially go the draft route this season to go along with the Sam Darnold and whoever else they get into training camp.
And that's what I think it's got to be. And like they're sitting there at number 11. They're just outside the top 10. So they're obviously not high enough to sort of control their own destiny. Would they try to trade up? I think it's going to depend on what quarterback is there. Like how much does O'Connell potentially cover it? Just about every Notre Dame fan's least favorite quarterback, JJ McCarthy,
that's a guy who I also think might end up in Minnesota.
That's what I'm saying. Like picking at number 11, that's a guy who could potentially, be in that range and end up in Minnesota. And maybe they trade up a couple of spots, to with somebody, into the top 10 to try to get him. I think that is a distinct possibility. And because when I saw Darnold, it's like I thought kind of initially what Father David was saying. It's like let the tank begin, and that's kind of what it seemed like. But they have been somewhat active on the defensive side of the ball, addressing defensive guys with free agency and stuff like that. So they're trying to get better on defense, but then they go out and get a guy like Darnold. I thought Josh Dobbs played fairly well when they made the trade for him after the Cousins injury last year. Now the team didn't show it, but they also had, horrible running backs and, nothing like there was basically other than Justin Jefferson. And remember, Justin Jefferson was hurt for a good chunk of the season last year as well. I guess they had Jordan Addison who turned out pretty good, but that's the thing. Like whatever quarterback that they have is going to have a couple of pretty good, one excellent wide receiver and another pretty good wide receiver. They need to address the running back. The offensive line isn't horrible. I think that they're going to end up trying to draft a quarterback. They're either at number 11
they have
or trade
TJ
into the top 10.
Hawkinson at tight end as well. Remember they traded with the Lions to get TJ Hawkinson. So it's like they have a solid wide receiver and tight end room. And I'm glad you brought this up. Bryce says drafting McCarthy would be a huge mistake. Listen, Bryce, I was not high on McCarthy myself, but I watched the entire NFL Network day of the quarterbacks at the combine. And you know what everyone talked about was how McCarthy could be passing Jaden McDaniels. Like they're basically saying, 1 and 2 is set.
Jaden Daniels. You keep adding and subtracting like mix and O's and whatever else.
Yeah, long day. Guys. But Williams and May are 1 and 2. And I've heard a lot of conversation that McCarthy could be the number 3 guy, right? Like, and they have him ahead of Penix. They have him ahead of Milton. Like he is the guy. It's going to be either Daniels or McCarthy at 3 or 4. And, I like to think I know a lot about football, but when all of these NFL guys are consistently saying, McCarthy is on a lot of people's radars, he's got to be doing something right.
They love him. I know. So he's going to go in the first round. It's just a matter of where he goes at this point. Fill in the blank. New Washington Commanders offensive coordinator Kliff Kingsbury is blank.
Is making me nervous because the Commanders have been the doormat of the NFC East for a good time now. And not only is their new head coach, the Cowboys' ex-defensive coordinator, but said defensive coordinator is slowly bringing along some of those guys from Dallas that he liked. Washington's got some good draft picks. And now you bring in, a guy who is a really good offensive coordinator, at least, a respected offensive mind. It just kind of makes you nervous as an NFC division rival that, Washington could be on the track of turning things around here.
Maybe I'll end up eating my words, but I just think Kliff Kingsbury is so overrated as an offensive coordinator. Look, a timeline of Kliff Kingsbury's ascension, in the minds of the football world. His stock goes through the roof in 2012 when he's coaching Johnny Manziel at Texas A&M, and Manziel wins the Heisman. Okay, so he parlays that into a head coaching job at Texas Tech, where he has 2 winning seasons. The first season that he had, 8-5, was his best year. He becomes head coach there. He's got both Baker Mayfield and Patrick Mahomes on the roster. 2013, he goes 8-5. Mayfield is a part-time player. Mahomes isn't even playing yet. Mayfield ends up transferring to Oklahoma the next year. And so in 2 years with Patrick Mahomes as his starting quarterback, he wins a grand total of 12 games in 2 seasons with Mahomes as his starting quarterback. He gets fired after 2018, after 3 straight losing seasons. But guess what happens? It's 2018. Do you know what happened in 2018? Patrick Mahomes threw 50 touchdowns with the Kansas City Chiefs. So all of a sudden, because Kliff Kingsbury was attached to Patrick Mahomes 5 years earlier, he goes from getting fired as the Texas Tech head coach. He was almost going to be, remember, on the USC staff, but he turns it instead into a head coaching gig with the Cardinals, where he gets to draft his own quarterback. He goes and gets his guy, Kyler Murray, just a year after the Cardinals had drafted Josh Rosen in the first round, but they throw Rosen to the ditch, and they, because he handpicks his quarterback. How good was, Kyler Murray had his flashes, but he goes 9 games under 500 in 4 years with the Cardinals, gets fired, 1 year at USC. Caleb Williams regresses in that 1 year, and now is the offensive coordinator back in the NFL again with the Washington Commanders. Again, maybe I'll eat my words because they're going to play the Cowboys twice a year, but I just really think that his star has been attached to 2 guys, Johnny Manziel and Patrick Mahomes, and he really hasn't proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he really deserves all the credit that he has gotten over the course of his career, all because of those 2 guys.
I agree. And a lot of people in the chat have pointed out, along with what you're saying, he is failing up.
Yep. That's what I agree. That's what I think as well. It's just like his name was attached to those 2 guys, just like any guy for a couple of years who was attached to Sean McVay was going to become, either a coordinator or a head coach someplace. So, like I said, maybe I'll eat my words and he'll prove otherwise, but I haven't seen it so far. It hasn't been, maybe he'll be better as a coordinator than he was as a head coach. But again, it's not like Caleb Williams. It would have been hard for Caleb Williams to take another step up based on the first year that he had, but didn't look great in his season with Kliff Kingsbury. All right. Omar wants to know why the Cowboys.
You're bringing this one in, huh?
Let Derrick Henry go to Baltimore, and it's just Jerry
all
is
in.
just a cheapskate, man.
All in.
They don't go the free agency route. They re-sign their own guys, and they just, they re-sign their own guys and they go the draft route. We'll see. We'll see if they can fill the holes that they need.
Listen, the Cowboys are going to draft a running back, and I'm just praying that it's Audric Estime.
I actually liked the moves that they made last year, like when they went out and they got Gilmore and they got Brandon Cooks. It took them half the year to finally figure out that they could throw to Brandon Cooks and,
right.
include him in the offense. Gilmore, they would have been completely lost defensively if they hadn't gone out and got Gilmore last year. But those are 2 of the bigger moves that they've ever made, and those weren't necessarily free agency as well. There were trades, involved.
So I heard something today. I'll send this to you. Well, when I was listening to it, I actually decided not to send it to you because I knew it would upset you. But I was listening to a Rich Eisen today, and he did a segment on this. And basically what he said is, everyone's coming back to this Jerry Jones comment of all in. And Rich Eisen believes the interpretation of all in. And this is, what he's heard around the combine and being around, a lot of NFL people is he thinks that Jerry's version of all in is not restructuring Dak's contract and basically saying they are all in with Dak. This is Dak's situation to figure out and handle going in to the season. And then, so I don't know how much, again, validity there is to that, but that's what he is being viewed as all in, is Jerry's stubbornness to not rework Dak's deal and allow him to, essentially ride out with the situation. Because if the Cowboys redid Dak's deal, they'd free up a lot of money to go get other pieces elsewhere.
Right.
But instead of not restructuring it, it's like, okay, Dak, the load is on your shoulders.
So he's saying
figure it out.
It's all in on this season to
Yes.
get it done. So he's basically putting it all on Dak.
Yes.
Is what Rich Eisen is saying.
Yes.
Well, if that's the case, then I don't think that's the way to go. But
I mean, did we expect anything less? Yes, Tyler Evans, they do need to release Michael Gallup.
And remember, a couple of years ago, when they traded Amari Cooper, they decided, they traded away Amari Cooper when Michael Gallup was coming off an injury. And they were basically saying that, and then they re-signed, I think did they franchise Dalton Schultz for that year?
Yeah.
Whom, of course, they've since let walk. But they basically were justifying trading away Cooper's salary by keeping Michael Gallup and Dalton Schultz for that year. And like in the aggregate, their vision was those two guys were going to be more productive than Amari Cooper.
Yeah, and both those guys aren't going to be on the roster next season.
Right. So. Exactly. That's all you had to do is wind us up. All right, well, that's going to do it for tonight. Again, Vince will be in here tomorrow. Jesse, your last show for the week, but I will see you soon. Jesse's heading into South Bend for birthday shenanigans this weekend. So I will see you soon.
Yes, I have a lot of things to get packed up, but I will be arriving this evening.
All right. Sounds good. Hit the like button before you leave, subscribe, rate, and review, and we will talk to you on Thursday on IB Nation Sports Talk.